rancher on a 7-meter stilt cabin in a desert, driving off a Cougars. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. In the heart of the vast, unforgiving desert, far from the hustle and bustle of city life, lived a rancher who had built his home on stilts. His cabin, a towering 7 meters high, stood proudly amidst the endless stretches of sand and cactus. It wasn't much, but it was his sanctuary, the only place he felt truly at peace. Every day, he woke up to the sound of the wind whispering through the desert and the occasional rustle of animals scurrying across the dry earth. Life was quiet, solitary, and at times lonely, but that was how he liked it. The rancher, a rugged man with a rough exterior, had made his life here in this harsh environment. His days were filled with tasks, feeding the cattle, repairing the fence posts, and keeping watch over the desert. He didn't mind the solitude. It was the way of life he had chosen after losing his family years ago. The wind was always his companion, and the silence of the desert was his solace. But things were about to change. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the rancher noticed something unsettling. His cattle, usually calm and docile, were restless. They huddled together in a corner of the corral, their eyes wide with fear. Something wasn't right. The rancher grabbed his rifle, his heart pounding in his chest as he scanned the surrounding area. He knew the desert well, every rock, every shadow. But tonight, there was an eerie stillness in the air. And then he saw it. From the edge of the desert, emerging from the darkness, a cougar slinked closer to the cattle. Its eyes gleamed with hunger, and its movements were as silent as death itself. The rancher's breath caught in his throat. A cougar wasn't an unusual sight in the desert, but this one was different. It was bold, too bold for its own good. It had crossed into his territory, threatening the safety of his cattle. Without hesitation, the rancher moved swiftly, positioning himself at the edge of the corral, rifle ready in his hands. The cougar didn't seem to notice him at first, focused entirely on its prey. But the rancher knew he couldn't wait any longer. He needed to act fast. With a steady hand, he aimed and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed through the desert, breaking the silence like a thunderclap. The cougar froze, its ears twitching as it turned toward the source of the noise. The rancher fired again, this time a warning shot aimed at the ground. The cougar snarled, its hackles raised, but it didn't retreat. It was hungry, desperate even, and fearlessly it lunged toward the nearest cow. The rancher's pulse raced. He wasn't about to let this predator destroy his livelihood. Without thinking, he sprinted toward the cougar, rifle still in hand, and shouted at the top of his lungs. The cougar hesitated, startled by his presence, and for a moment, the rancher saw his chance. With a swift movement, he raised his rifle and fired a third shot, this time directly at the cougar. The animal yelped in pain as the bullet struck its side, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned and fled back into the desert, its form disappearing into the night. The rancher stood there, heart pounding in his chest, watching the dark figure vanish into the horizon. The silence returned, but this time, it felt different. The danger had passed, but the rancher knew this was just the beginning. His quiet life on the stilts was about to face new challenges. The desert had always been unforgiving, but now it seemed to have a new, wild force to reckon with, and he would be ready for whatever came next. As the night settled in over the desert, the rancher found himself in a rare moment of peace. The adrenaline from the cougar encounter still pulsed through his veins, but his mind was slowly quieting, his breath returning to normal. His cattle had calmed down, and the desert, once again, seemed to fall into its familiar stillness. But even as the moon hung high in the sky, the rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the horizon, waiting. The next morning, the rancher woke early, as he always did. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting long shadows across the sand, and the temperature still clung to the chill of the night. He stepped outside the cabin, feeling the cool breeze against his skin, but as he walked toward the corral, A strange sense of unease settled over him. Something was off. The cattle were nervous again, pacing restlessly around the pen, their eyes darting toward the edge of the desert, where the morning fog was beginning to lift. The rancher's hand instinctively went to the rifle slung over his shoulder. This time, however, it wasn't a cougar he was worried about. As he scanned the horizon, he saw movement, figures emerging from the fog, moving swiftly toward his ranch. At first, he thought they might be travelers, but there was something about their pace, the way they moved, that didn't sit right. They were too organized, too purposeful. He squinted, trying to make out their shapes. As they drew closer, the rancher's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just one person. It was a group, a small army of men on horseback, riding in perfect formation. They were coming for him. He knew it before they even reached the gate. The rancher's mind raced as he assessed the situation. He could retreat into the cabin, but that wouldn't do him any good. He'd have to face them. He had no idea who they were, but the fact that they were coming for him meant they were trouble. They stopped just short of the corral, their horses kicking up dust as they halted. The leader, a tall man with dark, weathered features, dismounted first. He was followed by several others, each of them dressed in rough, desert-worn clothing, their eyes scanning the land as if looking for something specific. The rancher's grip tightened around his rifle. "I've heard about you," the leader called out, his voice rough, yet oddly respectful. "You've got quite the reputation around here." The rancher narrowed his eyes, confused. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease growing in his chest. "We heard you took down a cougar last night," the man said, his gaze shifting to the rifle in the rancher's hands. "You've got some skill with that thing." The rancher didn't respond, but his mind began to work. Who were these men, and why were they here? What did they know about the cougar, and why were they watching him? The leader took a step forward, his gaze never leaving the rancher's face. "We're here because we need your help," he said. The rancher raised an eyebrow. "Help? From me?" The leader nodded slowly. "There's a bigger threat out here in the desert than a cougar. Something we can't deal with on our own." The rancher's curiosity piqued, but he remained cautious. "And what exactly do you want me to do about it?" The leader glanced back at his men, who were watching the rancher with a mix of respect and anticipation. "We've got a situation," the man said. "A wild band of raiders has been terrorizing the area, taking what they want and leaving destruction behind. We've been trying to stop them, but we need someone who knows the land, someone who isn't afraid to stand up to them. We need you." The rancher felt a tight knot form in his stomach. The desert had always been his domain, his refuge, but now it seemed to be drawing him into something far darker. He didn't want to get involved in another fight, but the look in the leader's eyes told him this wasn't something he could ignore. He hesitated for a moment, weighing his options, but finally, he lowered his rifle. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll help. But know this, if I'm getting involved in this, we're doing things my way." The leader's face broke into a grim smile. "That's why we came to you. You've got the skills, and you know how to survive out here." The rancher nodded, the weight of the decision settling on him. This wasn't just about protecting his land anymore. It was about standing up for something greater. The group of men mounted their horses once more, and the rancher followed them, his heart pounding in his chest. They were heading into unknown territory, into a fight that would test everything he knew about survival. But for the first time in years, the rancher felt something stirring inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since the day he first stepped into the desert. The battle had just begun, and he would be ready. The rancher had barely settled into the rhythm of the day before the unexpected reality of his new alliance began to take shape. As he joined the leader and his men on horseback, the dry desert air seemed to grow heavier with every passing mile. His thoughts churned with questions. Who were these men, really? Why had they sought him out, and what exactly had they gotten themselves into? But he kept his silence, observing the group closely as they rode deeper into the arid landscape. The leader, still riding ahead, seemed unbothered by the heat, his posture unwavering as he guided the small group toward the hills. The rancher had lived his whole life on the desert's edge, but the further they traveled, the more uncertain he felt about what awaited them. The desert was vast, a seemingly endless ocean of sand and dust. Yet here, the land felt more treacherous than it ever had. The men in the group had hardened expressions, their eyes scanning the horizon with suspicion. They were experienced, he could tell, but there was something about the way they carried themselves, an unease that even the rancher, with all his years of solitude, could not ignore. They stopped near a rocky outcrop as the sun reached its peak, casting long shadows across the terrain. The leader turned to face the rancher. "This is where the raids have been happening," he said, his voice low but clear. "We've been tracking them for weeks, but we've hit a dead end. We need someone who knows the land, someone who knows how to deal with these kinds of men." The rancher nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. These raiders, whoever they were, weren't just ordinary criminals. The way the leader spoke about them, along with the nervous tension in the air, told him that they were dealing with something far worse. "I've seen tracks like this before," the rancher said quietly, examining the ground beneath his boots. "These men don't just take what they want, they destroy. And they're not working alone. They've got a network." The leader's eyes narrowed. "That's what we thought. But we don't know where they're coming from, or where they've gone. All we know is that they've been attacking every outpost, every settlement on the fringes. And they're getting bolder." The rancher chewed on his words for a moment. He had seen his share of violence and chaos in the desert, but this felt different. There was a method to these attacks, an unsettling order that hinted at something far more organized. "I've dealt with raiders before," he said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of years spent fending off danger. "But I've never seen anyone as bold as this." "That's why we need you," the leader said. "You know the land, and you've survived this long out here. We need someone who can help us track them down, confront them, and put an end to this before it spreads any further." The rancher could see the sincerity in the man's eyes. It was the same kind of resolve he had seen in his own reflection after the deaths of his family, an unyielding drive to survive, no matter the cost. As the heat of the day wore on, the rancher made his decision. "All right," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I'll help you. But understand this, we don't go in guns blazing. We track them, learn their moves, and hit when we have the advantage. I'm not looking for a fight. I'm looking to end this." The leader nodded, a small hint of relief in his eyes. "That's exactly what we need." With that, the group moved forward, the desert landscape stretching out in front of them like an unforgiving sea. As they trekked deeper into the territory where the raiders had been active, the rancher's mind raced with plans. He knew the desert like the back of his hand, every ridge, every dry creek bed, every rock outcropping. He'd spent his life reading the land, its patterns, its rhythms, and now it was time to put that knowledge to use. They made camp that evening on the outskirts of a small canyon, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset. As the men gathered around the fire, the rancher found himself lost in thought. This wasn't the life he had chosen. He had sought peace in the solitude of his cabin, away from the violence and chaos of the outside world. But now, he had no choice but to join this fight. The weight of the decision hung heavy on his shoulders. As the fire crackled, the leader spoke again. "Tomorrow, we push deeper. We find them, and we end this." The rancher nodded, his eyes fixed on the flames. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. It was no longer just about protecting his land. It was about something bigger. And as the stars began to dip the dark sky above, he steeled himself for the battle ahead. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight cut through the desert horizon, the rancher and the group of men set off again. The air was thick with heat, and the journey ahead seemed endless. But there was no turning back now. The desert had already tested him before, and this time, the stakes were higher. As they rode, the rancher found himself silently surveying the landscape, taking in every change in the terrain. The vast, barren stretches of sand gave way to rocky outcrops and dry creek beds, the markers of old, forgotten trails. He knew these lands like the back of his hand, and today, it felt like the desert itself was watching, waiting to see what would unfold. The leader rode beside him, seemingly lost in thought. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the land itself held its breath. "We're close," the leader said after a long silence, his voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. The rancher nodded, his eyes narrowing as he spotted fresh tracks on the ground. They were unmistakable, the marks of raiders, not just any random travelers. These men knew the land, and they were moving with purpose. "They're not far," the rancher muttered under his breath. The group slowed their pace, carefully navigating the rough terrain, always alert for any sign of movement. They came to a narrow pass between two towering cliffs, a natural choke point. It was perfect for an ambush. The rancher's instincts kicked in as he scanned the area. He could feel it now, the weight of the situation settling in. These raiders weren't just criminals looking for loot. They were organized, tactical. They knew how to hide, how to move without leaving a trace. But the rancher knew the desert better than anyone, and it was in times like these that his years of solitude and survival would serve him best. "We move in quietly," the rancher said, turning to the leader. "If they're here, they'll know we're coming if we charge in loud." The leader nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. The group spread out, each man moving with precision. The rancher led the way, keeping low to the ground, following the faint signs of the raiders' passage. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the rancher barely noticed the heat now. His focus was absolute. As they approached a small ridge, the rancher signaled for the group to stop. Below them, in a shallow valley, the raiders had set up camp. There were 5 men, all sitting around a fire, their horses tethered nearby. The rancher's sharp eyes scanned the group, taking in every detail. These were the raiders, but they didn't seem to be expecting an attack. They were too relaxed, too confident in their position. That was their mistake. The rancher's hand tightened around the rifle slung over his shoulder. This was the moment. The group moved into position, creeping down toward the camp with the stealth of shadows. The air was thick with anticipation. Every sound, every movement felt magnified in the stillness. The raiders were too focused on their campfire, oblivious to the danger creeping up on them. But just as the rancher was about to give the signal to strike, something unexpected happened. One of the raiders looked up, his eyes scanning the ridge above. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. They had been spotted. Without hesitation, the leader shouted a command, and the group sprang into action. The quiet desert air was shattered by the sound of gunfire as the raiders scrambled to their feet, reaching for their weapons. But the rancher and his men were quicker. The first raider was down before he even had a chance to raise his rifle. The others fought back, but they were no match for the precision and speed of the rancher and his team. In mere moments, the battle was over. The camp was silent, save for the sounds of heavy breathing and the crackling of the fire. The leader turned to the rancher, a look of admiration in his eyes. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. The rancher nodded, his expression unreadable. "We did it. But this is just the beginning. There's more out there." The group gathered around the fallen raiders, securing their weapons and supplies. The rancher knew this victory was only temporary. The desert had its own rules, its own harsh justice. And in the end, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about protecting the land, the people, and the legacy of those who had come before. As they left the camp, the rancher's thoughts turned inward. He had made a choice to fight, to stand up for something bigger than himself. And though the road ahead would be long and uncertain, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone anymore. The desert had always been a place of solitude, but now, as they rode off into the vast expanse, he realized that sometimes it was the people you least expected who became your greatest allies. As the dust settled over the raiders' camp, the rancher's team began to assess the aftermath of their successful ambush. The air was thick with the scent of smoke from the dying fire, and the only sound was the rustle of the wind through the dry brush. Despite the victory, the rancher couldn't shake the feeling that something more dangerous lurked just beyond the horizon. The leader of the raiders was among the dead, his body sprawled out on the ground like the others, but there was a deeper unease in the air. This wasn't just a random group of bandits. This was an organized force. "This isn't over," the rancher said quietly, his eyes scanning the area. The leader of the group, who had been riding with him, nodded grimly. "We've just taken down one part of a larger problem. There's more out there." These men were connected to something much bigger. The rancher glanced over at the others in the group. The men were busy securing the area, checking the weapons of the fallen raiders, and ensuring there were no hidden threats. He could see the resolve in their eyes, but there was also a flicker of doubt. They knew, just like he did, that this victory was only temporary. The real challenge lay ahead. "We need to keep moving," the rancher said, standing up from where he had crouched. "If we stay here too long, we'll be vulnerable to counterattacks. These raiders were just a part of the bigger picture. We need to track down the rest of them before they regroup." The leader nodded, signaling to the others to mount up. The group gathered their supplies and moved out, continuing their journey deeper into the desert. The sun beat down on them as they rode, the landscape stretching out endlessly in front of them. But the rancher didn't feel the heat. His mind was occupied with what lay ahead. They rode through the barren terrain, their path marked only by the occasional rock or scattered plant. There was no sign of other raiders, no obvious trail to follow. But the rancher knew better than to think they were safe. They were being watched. Hours passed, and the group made camp for the night in a secluded area nestled between two mesas. The rancher sat near the fire, his mind racing. He had been in these situations before, but this time, something felt different. These raiders were not like the others he had encountered over the years. They were methodical, organized, and dangerous. And as he sat in the flickering firelight, he couldn't help but wonder how far this network of raiders really reached. "What do you think they're after?" the leader asked, breaking the silence. The rancher looked up, meeting his gaze. "Power," he said simply. "These men aren't just here for food or supplies. They want control. They're trying to take over the land, and they'll do anything to get it." The leader nodded, his face hardening. "We need to stop them before they can spread any further. If they've already got a foothold here, they'll keep coming back." The rancher nodded. "We can't let that happen." As the fire burned down to embers, the rancher felt a shift in the air. The desert was alive with the sounds of the night, the distant calls of coyotes, the rustling of the wind through the sparse vegetation. But there was something else. He felt eyes on him. He stood up suddenly, scanning the dark horizon. His hand went instinctively to his rifle, but he saw nothing. The feeling, though, wouldn't go away. The group was still gathered around the fire, talking in low voices, unaware of the change in the air. The rancher moved cautiously toward the edge of the camp, where the darkness seemed thicker, more oppressive. He knew the desert well, but tonight, it felt different. Dangerous. A soft rustling sound broke the silence. His eyes snapped to the source of the noise. There, in the shadows just beyond the camp, he saw movement. He held his breath, trying to stay as still as possible. The rustling grew louder, and then, silence. He waited for what seemed like an eternity. The wind shifted, and in that moment, he knew. They were being followed. Without a word, he turned and hurried back to the camp, grabbing the leader by the arm. "We've got company," he said, his voice low and urgent. The leader's eyes flickered with alarm, and the men sprang into action, gathering their weapons and preparing for whatever was coming. The rancher felt the tension rise in the air as they formed a loose perimeter around the camp. His mind raced. He had known they weren't safe. He had known they were being watched. But the real question was, who had found them, and how close were they to the larger group of raiders? The sound of hooves echoed through the silence of the night, growing louder by the second. The rancher's grip tightened around his rifle, his pulse quickening. They were about to find out just how dangerous these raiders really were. The sound of hooves grew louder, echoing in the still night air. The rancher's heart began to race. He knew they were outnumbered, but he also knew that the desert was his ally. His team was skilled, and they had the element of surprise on their side. He gripped his rifle tightly, taking slow, deliberate breaths as he crouched behind a boulder, scanning the surrounding darkness. The leader of the raiders, a man with a cold, calculating look in his eyes, was leading the charge. The rancher could see the faint silhouette of the man on horseback, his silhouette stark against the moonlight. "Stay low, stay quiet," the rancher whispered to his group. They didn't need to be told twice. The men knew the gravity of the situation. The rancher's mind raced. It was clear now that this wasn't a simple band of raiders. They had the coordination, the numbers, and the knowledge of the land to be a serious threat. The rancher's instincts told him that these men were not just after supplies. They were after power. They wanted to control the desert, and they would stop at nothing to get it. As the sound of hooves grew closer, the rancher's group tightened their perimeter, moving silently like shadows through the desert landscape. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of dust and danger. The rancher's grip on his rifle tightened even further. The group had positioned themselves strategically along the ridge, waiting for the raiders to make their move. The rancher could hear the soft crunch of sand beneath the hooves as the raiders approached. He knew they were about to come into full view, and that would be the moment to strike. His eyes never left the horizon, watching intently for the first sign of movement. Then it happened. The raiders came into view, their horses kicking up dust as they rode into the open clearing. The rancher's heart pounded in his chest. He held his breath, waiting for the right moment. The first raider rode into the center of the camp, unaware of the danger lurking just a few yards away. The rancher gave the signal. Without hesitation, the group sprang into action, moving swiftly and silently to surround the raiders. The rancher's rifle fired first, the shot ringing out across the desert like a thunderclap. The lead raider's horse reared back in panic as the man fell, the rifle shot taking him down instantly. Chaos erupted. The raiders scrambled, reaching for their weapons as the rancher and his team descended upon them. It was fast, brutal. The raiders weren't prepared for an ambush of this magnitude. The rancher's team moved with precision, each man striking quickly, incapacitating the raiders before they could mount any kind of defense. The rancher moved through the chaos with a calm determination, his rifle steady in his hands. Another raider attempted to draw a pistol, but the rancher was faster. A single shot rang out, and the man fell to the ground. The remaining raiders, now outnumbered and disoriented, began to retreat. The rancher's group pressed on, but they were relentless. The leader of the raiders, a tall, menacing figure, was still on his horse, trying to rally his men. "They're not going to run," the rancher muttered under his breath. "Not this time." The leader of the raiders turned his horse and began to charge, his eyes filled with fury. The rancher steadied his aim, knowing this would be the final moment. With a single shot, the leader of the raiders was taken down, his horse skidding to a halt as the man fell lifeless to the ground. The camp fell silent. The remaining raiders surrendered quickly, realizing they had no chance of winning. The rancher's group moved in to secure them, ensuring there would be no further resistance. As the dust settled, the rancher stood in the center of the camp, his heart still racing. But his mind clear. He had won. The desert had been kind to him once again, but he knew this wasn't the end. The raiders might have been defeated, but there were always more waiting, always more threats lurking in the shadows. He turned to the leader of his group, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. "It's done," the rancher said, his voice steady. "But we're not finished yet. The desert is full of dangers, and we need to stay vigilant." The leader nodded, understanding the weight of the rancher's words. "What now?" "Now," the rancher replied. "We find out who sent them, and we make sure this never happens again." The group began to gather the supplies from the raiders' camp, preparing to move out. As the rancher surveyed the wreckage, a sense of finality washed over him. This battle was over, but the war for the desert was just beginning. The next steps would be crucial. As the rancher and his team moved deeper into the desert, the weight of their recent victory lingered in the air. The raiders had been defeated, but the rancher knew better than to believe that meant safety. The desert was a place of constant change, and what was true today could be gone tomorrow. The leader of the group, still riding beside him, broke the silence. "You did well back there," he said, his voice low but respectful. "You don't give yourself enough credit." The rancher nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We've won the battle," he said, "but the war is far from over." The leader's face darkened. "You think this is bigger than we've been told?" "I know it is," the rancher replied, his voice steady. "These men weren't just out for blood or supplies. They were organized, and they were working under someone's orders. This isn't the first time we've seen this, and it won't be the last." The group rode on, the sound of hooves muffled by the sand as they made their way toward a small valley. The rancher had lived through enough to know that the desert held more than just secrets. It hid danger in plain sight, waiting for those who were too careless to see it coming. As they reached the edge of the valley, the rancher motioned for the group to stop. "We set up camp here," he said, dismounting and scanning the surroundings. "We need to rest and prepare. Tomorrow, we go after the ones who sent these men." The group set to work quickly, each member accustomed to the harsh demands of life in the desert. They built a fire, the orange glow flickering against the darkening sky, and settled in for the night. But sleep didn't come easily for the rancher. His mind was still racing with questions. Who were these raiders really working for? What was their endgame? And most importantly, how could he stop them before they grew too powerful? As he lay awake, staring at the stars, the rancher's thoughts returned to the day his life had changed. The day he left everything behind and came to the desert. He had come here for peace, to escape the pain of losing his family, but now he was in the middle of something far bigger than himself. The desert had always been a place of solitude for him, a place where he could live quietly, away from the world's troubles. But now, it was a battlefield. The next morning, the rancher rose early, as always, before the sun had fully emerged from behind the mountains. The air was crisp, and the world seemed still. But there was a tension in the air, an electric charge that made the rancher uneasy. He knew they were close. They had to be. "Get ready," he said to the group, his voice low but commanding. "We're moving out." The men packed up their gear quickly and silently, the only sounds the rustling of their clothes and the soft creak of leather. As they rode deeper into the desert, the rancher's instincts told him they were nearing their goal. The land was changing. What had once been open plains was now rocky terrain, filled with cliffs and outcroppings. The perfect place for an ambush. The rancher signaled for the group to slow their pace as they approached a narrow canyon. He knew they would have to be careful. "Stay close," he instructed. "We don't know what we're walking into." They moved cautiously through the canyon, the walls rising high on either side, casting long shadows in the early morning light. The air felt thick, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The rancher's eyes flicked from side to side, his senses alert to every movement, every sound. And then, just as they rounded a bend, they saw them. A group of men, their horses tethered to the rocks, standing in the shade of a cliff. The rancher's heart skipped a beat. These were the men they had been tracking, the ones responsible for the chaos in the desert. The raiders were not alone. With them were two women, both dressed in the same rough, desert-worn clothing, their faces hidden beneath scarves. The rancher's pulse quickened. He had expected to find more raiders, but not this. Not this group. The men were talking quietly, their voices barely audible above the wind. The rancher motioned for his team to spread out, their movements fluid and silent, each one taking their position. This was it. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The leader of the raiders looked up suddenly, his sharp eyes scanning the canyon walls. He didn't see the rancher's team, not yet, but he was getting closer. The rancher's grip tightened on his rifle. This would be the moment of truth. The desert had brought him here, and now it would decide the outcome. The rancher motioned for his team to stay low, his eyes locked on the group of raiders ahead. He could feel the tension building in the air, the heat of the desert pressing down on them like a weight. The narrow canyon walls on either side created a sense of confinement, but the rancher knew they had no choice but to move forward. These men had been responsible for the violence spreading across the desert, and now they were within striking distance. As the rancher signaled to his men, they moved silently into position, crouching behind rocks and outcroppings, their rifles ready. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of the raiders talking, but the rancher could make out only fragments of their conversation. His focus was sharp. He couldn't afford any distractions. He needed to strike first. The leader of the raiders was standing just a few yards ahead, his back turned to the canyon wall, unaware of the danger closing in on him. The rancher's pulse quickened. This was their chance. Without a word, he raised his rifle, aiming for the leader's back. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, something caught his eye. One of the women, who had been standing silently by the campfire, turned her head, her gaze sweeping across the canyon. The rancher froze. The woman's eyes met his for the briefest moment. Then, she gave a slight nod. It wasn't a warning, but a signal. She knew they were there. The rancher's mind raced. Was she one of them, or was she a prisoner? It was impossible to tell, but he knew one thing for sure. The situation was no longer what he had expected. The woman spoke to the raiders in a low voice, her words barely audible, but the rancher could hear the urgency in her tone. She was trying to warn them. The leader of the raiders looked up, his sharp eyes scanning the canyon walls. In an instant, everything changed. The rancher didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the canyon. The leader of the raiders stumbled forward, clutching his chest, his rifle falling from his hands as he collapsed to the ground. Chaos erupted. The raiders scrambled to react, reaching for their weapons, but the rancher and his team were already moving. The ambush was a blur of motion, gunfire, shouts, and the thunderous sound of hooves as the raiders tried to flee. But the rancher's team was faster. They had the advantage of surprise, and they used it to full effect. One by one, the raiders fell, incapacitated by well-placed shots. The rancher moved through the chaos with precision, his rifle steady in his hands as he picked off the remaining raiders. The woman, who had been standing by the fire, suddenly broke free from the group, rushing toward the rancher with a look of desperation in her eyes. "Stop!" she cried out, her voice pleading. "Please, they're not the ones you're looking for." The rancher hesitated for a moment, his rifle still aimed at the last raider, who was now on the ground, barely conscious. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. The woman took a step closer, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "They're just mercenaries. They're being paid to cause chaos. But they don't know who's really behind it." The rancher's mind was spinning. He lowered his rifle slightly, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "And who's behind it?" The woman's gaze flickered toward the fallen raider leader, then back to the rancher. "It's not them," she repeated. "They were hired by someone else. Someone powerful. Someone who wants to take control of the desert. You have no idea what you're up against." The rancher's stomach churned. He had suspected there was more to this than just a group of raiders, but now it was clear. This was bigger than he had imagined. "Who is it?" he demanded. The woman hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know his name, but he's a powerful man. He controls the land, the trade routes, the people. He's been using men like these to destabilize the area, to weaken the smaller communities, and to take over everything. He wants to own the desert, and he will do anything to get it." The rancher's jaw tightened. This was no longer just about protecting his land. It was about protecting everyone in the desert. And that meant he had to find out who was behind this, no matter what it took. "Where do I find him?" he asked, his voice cold with determination. The woman shook her head. "I don't know, but I do know this. He's coming for you. And when he comes, it won't just be him. He'll bring an army." The rancher stared at the woman for a long moment, his mind racing with the new reality. The desert had always been a place of solitude, but now it was a battleground. He wasn't just fighting for his land anymore. He was fighting for everyone who lived here, everyone who called the desert home. And he would make sure that whoever was behind this would pay. The desert air grew heavier as the rancher and his group continued their trek through the unforgiving land. The woman's warning had made it clear, this was only the beginning. Whoever was behind this had far-reaching influence, and they wouldn't stop until the desert was theirs. The rancher wasn't ready to let that happen. They had to act fast. He had no intention of waiting for an army to come to him. If the man behind the chaos was coming, he was going to make sure the first move was his. As they set up camp that night in the shadow of a distant mesa, the rancher gathered his team around the fire. The men looked worn, their faces smeared with dirt and sweat from days of travel, but there was determination in their eyes. They had already fought and won, but this next fight would be unlike anything they had faced before. "We've got one chance," the rancher said, his voice low but firm. "We need to find out who this man is and take the fight to him before he can build up his forces. The longer we wait, the stronger he gets." The leader of the group nodded, his face grim. "How do we find him?" "We start by taking out his network," the rancher replied. "We'll hit his supply lines, his strongholds. If we can cut him off from the people he's using to spread his influence, we can slow him down, maybe even break his operation." The plan was risky, but it was their best shot. The rancher knew the desert better than anyone, and he trusted the land to give him the advantage. With no clear target, they had to work fast and strike unpredictably. The next few days were spent gathering information from nearby settlements, talking to traders, farmers, and anyone who might know something about the mysterious man. It wasn't long before they learned what they needed to know. The man was a wealthy landowner from the northern part of the desert. He had been using his wealth and influence to buy up land, manipulate trade routes, and intimidate anyone who stood in his way. His operation was vast, with a network of mercenaries working to destabilize smaller communities in the area. As they pieced together the puzzle, the rancher felt the weight of the coming battle. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about the people, the farmers, the traders, the families who had lived in the desert for generations. They were all at risk. "We'll hit him where it hurts," the rancher said, his voice full of resolve. "We take out his supply lines, his sources of power. We hit him hard and fast." The group moved out at dawn, ready to take the fight to the man who had caused so much destruction. They rode hard, using the cover of the desert to stay hidden as they made their way north. They had a plan, but the rancher knew it wasn't going to be easy. This man wasn't going to give up his control without a fight. When they reached the man's stronghold, they found it well guarded, too well guarded. The rancher knew they couldn't just charge in. They had to be smart. "We need to draw them out," the rancher said. "Create a diversion, make them think we're attacking from the east. When they move, we'll hit from the west." It was a dangerous move, but it worked. The diversion pulled most of the guards away, and the rancher and his team slipped in under the cover of darkness. The battle that followed was brutal. The mercenaries were well trained, but they were no match for the rancher's team. They fought with precision, each man knowing exactly what to do. The rancher moved through the chaos like a shadow, his rifle steady in his hands as he took down target after target. When the dust finally settled, the rancher stood over the fallen leader. The man was alive, but barely. His face was covered in blood, and his eyes were wild with fury. "You thought you could take the desert," the rancher said, his voice cold. "But you were wrong." The leader spat out blood, sneering at the rancher. "You may have won today, but this desert belongs to me. It always will." The rancher's expression hardened. Not anymore. With a final, decisive shot, he ended the man's life. It was over. The rancher and his team had taken back control of the desert. The man's network crumbled, and the smaller communities in the area began to rebuild. But as the rancher stood there, looking out over the desert, he knew this peace was fragile. The desert would always have its dangers, its challenges. But it was his land, his home, and he would fight to protect it, for as long as it took. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the rancher rode off into the vast, empty desert, ready for whatever came next. In this captivating journey through the unforgiving desert, a rancher must face a dangerous network of raiders aiming to take control of the land. As the stakes rise, the rancher leads his team through relentless battles, using his knowledge of the desert to outsmart and defeat the men behind the chaos. This story is a testament to the resilience of those who live on the edge of civilization, perfectly capturing the essence of Western stories. With every twist and turn, the rancher faces overwhelming odds, pushing forward with unwavering determination. The tension builds as the group fights to protect their home, and the desert becomes more than just a backdrop. It is a character in itself. In this tale of survival, loyalty, and grit, the rancher's actions remind us why Western stories have captivated audiences for generations. As the battle intensifies, we are drawn into the world of outlaws and heroes, where every decision could mean life or death. The rancher's unwavering resolve to defend what is his mirrors the spirit of Western stories, and the ultimate showdown against a powerful enemy brings this intense narrative to its gripping conclusion. Whether you're a fan of classic Western stories or new to the genre, this thrilling adventure will keep you on the edge of your seat as you follow the rancher's fight for justice and survival.